UP government was gung-ho about its decision to hike the defence FDI cap to 49% last year in an effort to make India a hub of integrating state-of-the-art weapons system. The policy move was followed by an announcement of several joint ventures and intentions of investing in the sector. But a hard look at the data shows a paltry hike in dollar inflows. Here's a special CNBC-TV18 report. When the defence FDI cap was hiked to 49%, policymakers predicted big-ticket dollar inflows into the sector. But global investors are still wary about setting up a base in India. Data shows that in the September 2014 to June 2015 period, only $950,000 have flowed into the sector. This is just a notch better than the coir sector and is lower than what sectors like drawing instruments or dyes got. That's not all. Post-liberalization of the FDI policy, the FIPB cleared defence FDI proposals of less than $15 million. Experts say defence FDI inflows won't improve till foreign investors are allowed majority control.
Unless we increase our FDI limits to, as KPMG proposes, 74% and speed up the procurement process to bring it down to just about a year or 2 years for critical purchases, I do not see much increase in the FDI into India.
There are other reasons as well. Foreign investors want assured orders from the Ministry of Defence, the sole buyer of defence products in India.
If the buyer is not interested or doesn't give kind of assurance that products manufactured by the foreign investors in India would be purchased, so no investors would come and invest their money here.
The FDI liberalization has created a buzz as demonstrated by the 30-odd joint ventures involving companies like the Reliance Group, Tata Group as well as the Mahindras. But experts say these tie-ups are focused only on the local market.
Most of these joint ventures are still focusing on the Indian orders.
As a result, experts maintain that instead of becoming a systems integrator, India could at best become a low-key partner in the defence value chain.
We have become more of a supplier of non-critical, non-sensitive sub-assemblies and components rather than creating entire platforms.
The government maintains that India is set to see huge defence FDI inflows after the procurement norms are tweaked, which should happen over the next 2 to 3 months.
I think a lot of more orders need to flow from the Defence Ministry. The defence offset policy is at a very, very advanced stage. I think a number of decisions have been taken for future as far as offset policy is concerned. I think they need to set right a couple of things with retrospective effect. The defence procurement policy is also at its final stages, and I think in the next 2 to 3 months you'll see a huge movement altogether on the defence side.
While Manohar Parrikar is taking faster decisions in the Defence Acquisition Council and the DIPP has pitched in with easier norms, the Modi government will have to take a deeper and a more comprehensive tweaking of the FDI as well as the defence procurement policy to make India a hub of high-tech manufacturing. In New Delhi with Shereen, Bhan, Rituparna, Bhuyan.
Joining us now is C Uday Bhaskar, the director at the Society of Policy Studies, a veteran of the defence sector. Mr. Bhaskar, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC-TV18. You just heard what our story had to say. Why do you believe that despite all the optimism, everything that the government has said as far as the Make in India defence strategy is concerned, we've barely seen a trickle on the FDI front? Do you believe that it's an issue because of the lack of majority control when it comes to joint ventures? Do you believe it's because of the procurement process which hasn't been overhauled? What would you attribute, if I could call it, this flop too?
As to why we have such a modest inflow as far as investment is concerned from the foreign participants in India's overall defence sector. And as your report pointed out, it's a very small trickle. And the reason for this is it's not just a question of increasing the ceiling from 49% to 74% or whatever other figure has been suggested. My own reading over the last 2 decades is that despite the fact that we embarked upon the equivalent of economic liberalization as far as the country is concerned, India's overall ecosystem as far as defense manufacture is concerned is not very conducive for the big players. So we have a very ironical situation, which is that India is unable to attract the foreign investor in a credible manner for the long term, whereas Indian HR, that is Indian brains, are being used by all the big players, either in places like Bengaluru and Hyderabad, or Indian HR is being hired abroad at the cutting edge where military technology is using Indian HR. But the Indian ecosystem, as I repeat, is not conducive for this kind of an investment. And we have
Mr. Bhaskar,
really, in a way... Yeah.
If I may interrupt you, do you believe that the policy changes that this government is talking about, of course we're yet to see finalization of whether it's the procurement policy or the offset policy, but do you believe that the policy shift will ensure that India moves beyond just being a low-key supplier of non-strategic parts?
Well, that is the kind of desired objective at this point, but we have seen a similar exercise being undertaken in the past even by the UPA government. And my concern is that the overall ecosystem of India does not really attract or encourage the foreign participant. And for instance, the Vodafone and the retroactive tax policy that we introduced, or the fact that when it comes to defense manufacture, the government of India is the sole customer and we do not encourage exports. So as a result, you do not integrate the Indian manufacturing hub into the global chain, and you remain at a relatively modest level. So we need a very, very radical kind of strategic overview where the foreign manufacturer is given what I would call as a more empathetic kind of treatment, which is not the case now. This country is still under what you might call as the Bofors HTW kind of shadow, which is that every foreign manufacturer is deemed to be someone who is trying to, quote-unquote, corrupt the system unless they prove otherwise. So I'm afraid we have not built up those kind of comfort levels with foreign manufacturers. The only place where India seems to have some degree of what I would call as faith is in the equivalent of government-to-government supplies. So, for instance, with the United States, we've entered into what is called as the FMS, where you have the direct foreign military sale from one government to the other. That, I'm afraid, is not the only option. India needs to maximize its HR, which means the average IIT graduate or an engineer who is working for a foreign multinational in Bengaluru should be encouraged to be part of the Indian ecosystem, and that, I think, will only happen if you are able to attract and encourage the foreign participant to say that this is for the long term and that there will be no policy shifts, and our ultimate objective is to be part of a larger global chain and not just see this as a binary between one foreign manufacturer and the government of India.
We're running out of time, Mr. Bhaskar, so let me ask you for specifics, because if I look at the data, it doesn't give us any hope or, it doesn't look particularly encouraging. Defense FDI flows under $1 million between September 2014 to June 2015, this despite all the hype and the talk around FDI in defense. Defense FDI inflows of $5 million when you look at April 2000 to June 2015. How do you believe we can move beyond these numbers? How do we really, and I had the DIPP secretary in conversation with me today saying that this is going to be the big sector to drive FDI. What would be the 3 specific things that you believe the government needs to do to really drive big ticket FDI in the defense sector?
Very broadly, Shereen, I'm afraid I also share your pessimism on this. I do not see the great Indian octopus, which is what the Indian system has become in terms of rules and regulations, changing in a hurry. Now, I know that the MOD and various representatives have tried to project a very positive and optimistic picture, but my concern is that when Prime Minister Modi went to Tokyo last year, 2014, he talked about the Indian red tape becoming the red carpet. I'm afraid we have not seen anything that would lend any credibility to this assertion. And I think the challenge for the Prime Minister and the Defense Ministry is to ensure that at least one sector, the foreign manufacturer, the foreign participant, is made to feel welcome, and also the incentives are credible. Because let's face it, any foreign manufacturer who wants to come into India has to be assured of a long-term return on whatever they are bringing into the country. Now, we always seem to be of the view that they are doing us, or rather that we are doing them a favor by allowing them to enter the Indian market. So I'm afraid that whole attitude itself is something that is not conducive. So if I have to identify three things, I would say that we need much greater transparency in terms of rules and regulations. We need to compress timelines in terms of how quickly approvals are accorded. And thirdly, the most important, do not see the foreign vendor or the foreign manufacturer as somebody who is already guilty unless they come into India and prove otherwise. I think these are three very important issues. Shereen?
And those are important issues indeed. Uday Bhaskar, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much for joining us and commenting on a CNBC TV18 special report, which really goes beyond the hype to see what the reality is like as far as the defense dream is concerned.